A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
If you have ever spent more than 5 minutes walking through the streets of Jerusalem, you have encountered the unofficial mascot of the city. They are on the ancient stone walls. They are perched like gargoyles on top of the large green garbage bins, and they are darting between the legs of tourists in the crowded alleys of the old city. I am talking, of course, about the Jerusalem street cat. You can smell them, you can hear their midnight territorial disputes, and you certainly cannot escape their unblinking judgmental stares.
Herman Poppleberry here, and Corn, you are not exaggerating. It is truly impossible to ignore them. You cannot go for a stroll in Rahavia or Talpiot without feeling like you are being watched by a dozen tiny, furry sentinels. Now, usually we dive into prompts sent in by our housemate Daniel, but today we actually decided to pick this topic ourselves. It has been on our minds for a while because it is such a visible, almost overwhelming part of living here in Jerusalem. It is a biological anomaly that defines the urban experience here.
It really is. And for those who do not live here, it is hard to convey the sheer scale of it. We are not just talking about a few strays here and there. We are talking about a massive, semi-permanent, semi-commensal population that has become woven into the very urban fabric of the city. Why here? Why so many? And how does our city compare to other famous cat havens like Istanbul or Rome? Is this a natural ecosystem that just happened? Or is it a human-engineered one that got out of control?
That is the core of it. We want to look at the ecological and urban history behind this feline explosion. Because, as it turns out, the reason your favorite hummus spot has 4 cats waiting by the door is not just a random occurrence. It is the result of specific historical decisions, municipal infrastructure, and a very particular kind of urban evolution. We are looking at a case study in unintended consequences.
I have some thoughts on this from my own perspective, which we will get into later. Being a sloth, I have a very different relationship with energy and movement than a street cat does. To me, they represent the absolute peak of metabolic anxiety. But before we get into the metabolic philosophy, Herman, let us talk history. How did we get to this point? Jerusalem did not always have hundreds of thousands of cats roaming the streets, right?
No, it did not. If you go back over 100 years to the late Ottoman period, the feline situation was very different. The real catalyst, the Big Bang for the Jerusalem cat population, actually happened during the British Mandate period in the 1930s. At that time, Jerusalem was dealing with a massive rat problem. The urban density was increasing rapidly, the sewage systems were primitive at best, and bubonic plague was a legitimate, terrifying concern for the Mandate authorities.
So the British, in their classic colonial problem-solving mode, decided to fight biology with biology. They looked at the rats and thought, we need a low-cost, self-replicating solution.
The British Mandate authorities actually imported cats specifically to help control the rodent population. They saw it as a self-sustaining pest control system. They did not just bring a few, they encouraged the growth of the feline population and even protected them to ensure they could keep the rats at bay. And in the short term, it worked quite well. The cats did their job. But the problem with introducing a highly efficient generalist predator into an urban environment is that they do not just stop when the specific pest is gone. They find a niche, they adapt, and they stay there.
It is the classic story of unintended consequences. You bring in the cats to kill the rats, but then you realize you have built a city that is a perfect incubator for cats. And once the British left and the city grew, the infrastructure changed in a way that actually favored the cats even more. It is like we handed them the keys to the city, and then forgot to ask for them back.
That is the second part of the historical puzzle. It is not just about who brought them here, it is about how we feed them. And I do not mean the kind people who leave out bowls of kibble, although that is a factor. I am talking about the garbage. Jerusalem's waste management system has historically relied on these large, communal, often open-access bins. In Hebrew, they are often called tzis fardaya, which means frog, because of their shape and green color.
Those bins are basically a 24-hour all-you-can-eat buffet for a scavenger. If you are a cat, a sephardaya is not a trash can. It is a resource hub. It is a high-calorie, low-effort survival center.
Precisely. In urban ecology, we talk about carrying capacity. That is the maximum population size of a species that an environment can sustain indefinitely given the food, habitat, water, and other necessities available. Jerusalem has an incredibly high carrying capacity for cats because of the way our waste is handled. Even as the city tries to modernize and move to underground bins, which they call tamanim, the legacy of that open waste system has already established a massive baseline population. The cat-to-bin ratio in neighborhoods like the Old City or Mia Sherim is staggering. You might have 30 cats supported by a single cluster of bins.
It is interesting to think about the cat as a byproduct of urban design. If you change the bins, you change the biology of the city. But let us look at the numbers for a second. We always hear about Istanbul being the ultimate cat city. There was even that famous documentary, Kedi, which painted a very beautiful spiritual picture of the cats there. How does Jerusalem actually stack up when you look at the data?
This is where it gets really fascinating. Istanbul is estimated to have over 100,000 street cats, with some estimates going as high as 700,000. Rome is also famous for its colonies, especially around places like the Largo di Torre, Argentina, where the cats live among the ruins of the temples where Julius Caesar was assassinated. But when you look at the per capita density, Jerusalem is often cited as having one of the highest, if not the highest, densities of street cats in the world.
Wait, really? More than Istanbul? That seems impossible given the size of Istanbul.
On a per square kilometer basis in the city center, yes. Some estimates suggest there are as many as 2,000 cats per square kilometer in certain parts of Jerusalem. If you take the total population of the city, which is around 950,000 people, and you look at the estimated cat population, which is anywhere from 240,000 to 300,000, you are looking at roughly one cat for every 3 or 4 people. In Istanbul, the ratio is much lower because the human population is 15 million.
That is an astronomical ratio. In Istanbul, the cats are spread out across a massive metropolis. In Jerusalem, because the city is more compact, and the architecture, especially in the old city and older neighborhoods, is very vertical and porous, the cats are more concentrated. The stone walls are full of crevices, the rooftops are interconnected, and the alleys are narrow. It is a three-dimensional playground for them.
Right, and the cultural attitudes are different too. In Istanbul, there is a very deep, almost spiritual connection to cats that dates back to the Ottoman era and Islamic tradition. There is a famous saying that if you kill a cat, you need to build a mosque to be forgiven. Cats are seen as clean animals that protect the city from vermin and even protect sacred texts from mice. So in Istanbul, the cats are communal property. Everyone takes care of them as a matter of religious and social duty.
And in Rome, it is more of a legal and historical protection, right?
In Rome, the cats are considered part of the city's bioheritage. Since 1991, it has actually been illegal to move or harm cats living in a natural colony of 5 or more. They are protected by the state. So you have these famous sanctuaries where volunteers manage the populations with medical care and food. It is very structured and almost institutionalized.
So if Istanbul is the spiritual home and Rome is the legal sanctuary, what is Jerusalem? To me, it feels more like a rugged, opportunistic survival story. The Jerusalem cat is a different beast entirely. They are not as pampered as the Istanbul cats, and they are not as protected as the Roman ones. They are survivors of the Middle Eastern urban landscape. They are scrappy, they are loud, and they are incredibly fast.
That is a great way to put it. Jerusalem cats are tough. They are part of a high-pressure environment. And that brings us to something I know you have been thinking about, Corn. You look at these creatures from a very specific perspective. As a sloth, you have a very different view on what it means to exist in a city.
I do. And I have to be honest, Herman. I find cats to be absolutely exhausting to observe. From a sloth's perspective, a cat is a metabolic spendthrift. They are constantly moving, constantly alert, constantly burning energy they might not even have. We talked about this back in episode 977, when we looked at the high-stakes survival of the sloth. My species survives through extreme metabolic discipline. We move slowly to avoid detection, and we use almost no energy. A cat, on the other hand, is a high-energy predator. Even when they are lounging, they are in a state of high tension. They can go from 0 to 60 in a second. To me, that seems like a very stressful, very inefficient way to live.
It is the difference between a low-energy specialist and a high-energy opportunist. You see their activity as a waste of resources.
Entirely. I look at a Jerusalem street cat, and I see a creature that is constantly gambling with its caloric intake. They fight over territory. They scream at each other in the middle of the night. They dart across traffic. It is all so fast. And for what? To sit on a trash can? I find their aggression particularly baffling. Why spend so much energy fighting another cat over a piece of discarded pita bread? From a sloth's point of view, that is a losing equation. You have spent more calories in the fight than you will gain from the food. It is metabolic madness.
That is a fair point. But for the cat, that aggression is part of their reproductive and territorial success. In a high-density environment like Jerusalem, if you are not aggressive, you do not eat and you do not mate. It is a feedback loop. The more cats there are, the more they have to compete, which makes them more intense, which requires more food. It is a cycle that sustains itself as long as the garbage bins are full.
It is a frantic existence. I also have a bit of a professional disagreement with their hunting style. Sloths are part of the ecosystem in a very quiet, non-disruptive way. Cats, especially in a place like Jerusalem, are an ecological wrecking ball. Because there are so many of them, they have a massive impact on the local biodiversity. They are not just eating garbage, they are hunting.
That is one of the serious second-order effects that people often overlook because they think the cats are cute. The impact on songbirds like the Palestine sunbird and small reptiles in Jerusalem is significant. Even if a cat is being fed by a person, its hunting instinct is still there. They kill for sport or just out of habit. In a city with 300,000 cats, that is millions of birds and lizards being removed from the ecosystem every year. It is a massive loss of biodiversity.
It is a real problem. And this is where my conservative outlook on policy comes in. I think we have to be realistic about management. You cannot just lead with your heart and ignore the data. There is this widespread assumption that trap neuter return programs, or TNR, are the silver bullet for managing feral populations. And while they are more humane than culling, the research shows that they only work if you reach a very high threshold of the population, usually around 75% or more, very quickly.
And in a city with 300,000 cats and constant movement between neighborhoods, reaching that 75% threshold is nearly impossible. If you neutered 10 cats in one alley, but there are 50 more in the next street over, the population just fills the vacuum. It is called the vacuum effect in ecology. You remove one individual, and another one moves in to take advantage of the resources.
Precisely. It is a logistical nightmare. And because Jerusalem is so politically and administratively complex, which we touched on in episode 511 when we talked about land ownership, getting a unified citywide policy that actually works is incredibly difficult. You have different neighborhoods with different priorities, different religious views on animal welfare, and a municipal budget that is always under strain. You cannot just apply a simple solution to a complex, layered city.
It really highlights how urban planning and biology are inseparable. If you want fewer cats, you do not just need more veterinarians, you need better trash cans. You need to reduce the carrying capacity of the environment. But that is expensive and requires a total overhaul of how the city functions. It means changing the behavior of nearly 1 million people and their relationship with waste.
It is also a cultural issue. There is a large segment of the population that loves these cats. They see them as part of the charm and the soul of Jerusalem. And I get that. There is something very evocative about a ginger tabby cat sitting on a 1,000-year-old stone wall in the late afternoon sunlight. But we have to ask ourselves at what point the population becomes a burden on the city's health and the local ecosystem.
It is a classic tension between the aesthetic or emotional value of a species and the practical realities of urban management. Jerusalem is a city of layers, and the cats are just the latest biological layer. But they are a very loud and very hungry layer. And as you mentioned, corn, they are also a potential health risk.
I do wonder about the health implications. We are lucky that rabies is not a major issue in the urban center of Jerusalem right now. But with that kind of density, any zoonotic disease could spread like wildfire. We are talking about toxoplasmosis, cat scratch fever, and various parasites. It is a ticking metabolic bomb. If a new feline-borne illness were to emerge, the density of Jerusalem would make it a perfect laboratory for an outbreak.
That is a grim thought, but you are not wrong. High density always comes with high risk. But let us pivot a bit. We have talked about the history and the stats. What about the actual experience of the cats themselves? You mentioned they seem stressed. Do you think there is a unique Jerusalem cat personality?
Oh, absolutely. If the Istanbul cat is a philosopher, and the Rome cat is an aristocrat, the Jerusalem cat is a street-smart hustler. They have this look in their eyes. They are not looking for a pet. They are looking for an opening. They are incredibly observant. They know exactly when the restaurants and the Mahane Yehuda markets start throwing out the scraps. They know which tourists are likely to drop a piece of falafel or a corner of a pita.
They have mapped the city's caloric geography perfectly. They know the rhythm of the city better than most humans do.
They have. And they are survivors of the climate too. Jerusalem gets very cold in the winter, sometimes with snow, and very hot and dry in the summer. These cats have to be incredibly hardy. You see them huddling together for warmth in the winter, and then in the summer they find these perfectly shaded spots in the stone crevices. They are masters of microclimates.
It is funny you say that because that is actually a very sloth-like trait. Finding the right microclimate to regulate your temperature without using internal energy.
You are right, Herman. I suppose I can give them credit for that. It is the one thing we have in common. We both understand the value of a good patch of shade. But I still think they move too much. They are always on the prowl, always twitching. It makes my fur itch just watching them.
Well, they have to move. They are part of a world that is much faster than yours. But let us talk about the future. What happens next? We are seeing more and more of these underground garbage bins being installed in Jerusalem. These are the ones where you just see a small metal pillar on the street, and the actual waste is stored in a large container deep underground.
Those are the cats' worst nightmare. It is a literal war between them and their primary food source. It is an engineering solution to a biological problem.
As those become more common, we might see a significant shift in the population. If the food supply drops, the population will eventually follow. But in the short term, it might actually lead to more aggression and more visible scavenging as the cats become more desperate. They might start moving into houses or being more aggressive toward people carrying groceries.
This is where the second-order effects get interesting. If the cats lose their easy access to garbage, do they start hunting more birds? Do they move into buildings more aggressively? Or do they just start relying more on the people who feed them? It could actually make the problem more visible and more annoying for residents before it gets better.
Probably a mix of all three, but it shows that you cannot just change one part of the urban system without affecting the biology. It is all connected. Jerusalem is a case study in how human infrastructure dictates animal behavior. We are the ones who created this niche, and we are the ones who are now trying to close it.
It also makes me think about the broader implications of how we view our cities. Do we want a sterile, perfectly managed environment, or do we want a city that has room for these kinds of messy, organic, semi-wild populations? There is a certain beauty in the chaos of Jerusalem, and the cats are part of that. They represent a link to a more wild, less controlled world.
I agree. But as someone who likes data and research, I also want to see a city that is healthy for everyone, including the cats. A population that is too large for its environment leads to suffering. You see cats that are sick, injured, or malnourished. That is not a good outcome for anyone. It is not kind to let a population grow to the point of starvation.
No, it isn't. And as a sloth, I'm all about minimizing suffering and maximizing efficiency. A smaller, healthier, well-managed population would be much more in line with my worldview. Less fighting, more napping. More stability, less frantic searching for the next meal.
We can all get behind more napping. So, what are the practical takeaways here? For our listeners who are visiting Jerusalem or who live in other cat-centric cities, what should they keep in mind?
First, recognize that the environment you build is the environment you get. If you provide open access to food, you will have a high population of scavengers. It is not a mystery. It is basic ecology. Second, if you want to help, support programs that are evidence-based. Emotional feeding often just sustains a population at a level that the environment cannot actually support, which leads to more problems down the line. It is better to support large-scale sterilization and waste management reform.
And third, appreciate the history. The cats of Jerusalem are a living record of the British Mandate, of urban growth, and of the city's unique waste management challenges. They are as much a part of the history as the stones themselves. They are a biological layer of the city's history.
I think that is a great way to put it. And even if I find them a bit high-strung and metabolically irresponsible, I have to respect their tenacity. They have carved out a life in one of the most contested and complex cities on Earth. They do not care about the politics. They just care about the next bin. There is something almost refreshing about that.
They really have. This has been a fascinating deep dive, even if we did pick it ourselves. It is one of those things that is so obvious you almost forget to ask why it is happening. But when you look at the British Mandate and the rats, it all starts to make sense.
And if you've been enjoying our deep dives into the weird and wonderful aspects of our world, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps other people find the show and join the conversation. We are trying to grow this community of curious minds.
It genuinely does. We love seeing the community grow. And if you want to reach out or see our archive, you can find everything at myweirdprompts.com. We have over 900 episodes there covering everything from urban planning in Vienna to the hidden power of churchland here in Jerusalem.
Definitely check out those past episodes if you want more context on how this city works. Episode 499 on urbanism is a great companion to this one. It explains why the streets are laid out the way they are, which directly impacts where the cats hang out.
For sure. Well, Korn, I think we have covered the feline landscape of Jerusalem pretty thoroughly. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just that I'm going to go find a nice patch of shade and stay perfectly still for a few hours. I need to recover from just thinking about all that cat energy. My heart rate is up just talking about them.
Sounds like a plan. I might go find a snack, but I will try to be less aggressive about it than a street cat. I will use a plate and everything.
Good luck with that. Thanks for listening to my weird prompts.
Until next time, this has been Herman and Corn Poppleberry. Take care, everyone.
So, Herman, we talked about the British Mandate and the rats, but I want to dig a little deeper into the specific biology of why these cats thrive here versus, say, a city in Northern Europe. It is not just the food, right? It is the climate.
You are absolutely right. Jerusalem's climate is a huge factor. We are in a Mediterranean transition zone. It is semi-arid. Cats are originally descended from the African wildcat, which is a desert creature. They are biologically predisposed to handle heat and limited water much better than they handle damp, freezing cold.
That makes so much sense. In a city like London or Berlin, a feral cat population has a much harder time surviving the winter without significant human intervention. The dampness gets into their fur and they lose body heat too fast. But here, they are in their ancestral element.
Their kidneys are incredibly efficient at concentrating urine, which is an adaptation for desert life. They can get a lot of their hydration from their food. And the stone architecture of Jerusalem is like a giant thermal battery. It absorbs heat during the day and releases it at night. For a cat, that stone is a perfect heating pad. They are literally living on a giant radiator.
It is funny how we see the stone as this ancient holy material, but for a cat, it is just an efficient piece of climate control technology. I can respect that. As a sloth, I am very sensitive to ambient temperature. If it gets too cold, my digestion basically stops because the bacteria in my gut can't function.
Right, because your gut bacteria are temperature dependent. Cats have a higher metabolic rate, so they can generate their own heat, but they are still much happier when the environment is helping them out. And Jerusalem, with its 300 days of sunshine, is basically a paradise for a desert-adapted predator.
But what about the water? Jerusalem is not exactly a lush oasis. Where are 200,000 cats getting enough water in the middle of a dry summer when it hasn't rained for 6 months?
That is where the urban infrastructure comes back in. It is not just the trash bins, it is the leaks. Jerusalem's water infrastructure is old, especially in the historic neighborhoods. There are always small leaks, dripping air conditioners, and communal gardens with irrigation systems. A cat only needs a very small amount of water to survive, and an urban environment is full of these tiny, hidden water sources. They are tapping into the waste of our utility systems.
It is a microecology. They are living off the inefficiencies of our civilization. It is actually quite brilliant in a frantic, high-energy sort of way. They have turned our leaky pipes into their watering holes.
It is, and it brings up an interesting point about the carrying capacity we mentioned earlier. It is not just one thing. It is the combination of the British historical introduction, the Mediterranean climate, the specific stone architecture, and the leaky open waste infrastructure. You remove any one of those, and the population looks very different.
It makes me think about how we often try to solve these problems with a single intervention, like a neutering campaign, without looking at the whole system. If you do not change the architecture, or the water access, or the waste system, the biology will always find a way to fill that niche. Biology is like water, it finds the cracks.
That is the conservative realism coming through again. You have to look at the structural incentives, not just the symptoms. If the city provides a niche for 300,000 cats, you will have 300,000 cats, no matter how many you neuter. The population will just bounce back through increased kitten survival rates or migration from other areas.
It is a hard truth for a lot of people to swallow, because we want to believe we can just fix it with a little bit of kindness and a few mobile vet clinics. But biology is more stubborn than that. It is a numbers game.
It really is. And it is not just cats. We see this with other urban species too. Look at the wild boars in Haifa or the ibex in Mitzpe Ramon. When the human environment provides a high-calorie, low-risk niche, the animals will move in. The boars in Haifa are a great comparison. That is another case of urban design creating a biological conflict.
The boars in Haifa are terrifying. That is a whole different level of urban wildlife. But cats are unique because we have this deep emotional bond with them. Nobody is leaving out bowls of milk for the wild boars. At least I hope not.
Well, some people are, and that is usually when the problems start. But you are right. The cultural status of the cat gives them a level of protection that other scavengers do not have. This brings us back to Istanbul. There is a reason the cats there are so healthy and well adjusted. The city has basically accepted them as a permanent, legitimate part of the population. They have integrated them into the social contract.
Jerusalem feels like it is still in conflict with its cats. We have not decided if they are a pest or a treasure. So they exist in this limbo, thriving on our waste but often suffering because we have not fully committed to taking care of them or managing them properly. We are in an awkward middle ground.
That is a profound point, Korn. The Jerusalem cat is a reflection of the city itself, complex, stubborn, surviving in the cracks of history, and not entirely sure where it fits in the modern world. It is a city of contradictions, and the cats are just one more layer of that.
It is poetic in a way, even if it is a very fast, very aggressive kind of poetry. I think I am starting to appreciate them a little more, even if I still think they need to calm down and stop screaming at 3 in the morning.
I think that is as much of a compliment as a cat is going to get from a sloth.
Probably, but let us talk about the other cities for a second. We mentioned Rome and Istanbul, but what about a place like Tokyo? They have cat cafes, but you do not see thousands of cats on the street.
That is a great contrast. Japan has a very different relationship with space and waste. Their waste management is incredibly strict and efficient. There is almost no organic waste available on the street for a scavenger. So, the feral population is much smaller and more controlled. The cat culture there is moved indoors, into the cafes and homes. It is a controlled environment.
So again, it comes back to the bins. If you want a Tokyo-style feline population, you need Tokyo-style garbage management. It is not about the cats, it is about the trash.
It is all about the calories. If you control the calories, you control the population. But Jerusalem is not Tokyo. We have a different culture, a different history, and a different way of living in our public spaces. We are a bit more chaotic, a bit more porous.
And I think I prefer the Jerusalem way, even with the chaos. A city without any animals feels a bit dead to me, even if those animals are high-energy predators that make me nervous. They remind us that we are still part of a biological world, even in the middle of a stone city.
I agree. There is something vital about it. It keeps us grounded in the reality of nature. Well said, Corn. I think that is a good place to wrap up our core discussion. We have gone from the British mandate to metabolic discipline to the philosophy of urban waste.
It has been a journey. And for our listeners, next time you're in Jerusalem and you see a cat staring at you from the top of a green bin, just remember, you are looking at a master of urban survival, a desert-adapted predator, and a living piece of history. You are looking at the result of 90 years of urban evolution.
And maybe toss them a little piece of chicken, but only if you want to be part of the problem.
Spoken like a true realist. Truly. Well, this has been My Weird Prompts. We have really enjoyed diving into this one. It is a topic that hits close to home for us here in Jerusalem.
It really does. And again, if you want to explore more of our episodes, head over to myweirdprompts.com. We have covered so many aspects of this city and the wider world. Episode 505 on Jerusalem Syndrome is another good one if you want to understand the psychological layers of this place.
Oh, that is a classic. The weight of history really does something to people here. And apparently, it does something to the cats too. They have developed their own version of Jerusalem Syndrome. Extreme territoriality and a sense of divine right to the trash bins.
It certainly does. They seem to handle it better than the humans, though. They don't need therapy, they just need a good sun patch.
They have less to worry about. No taxes, no politics, just the next Sephardaya.
The dream.
For some, maybe. I will stick with my leaves and my slow pace. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. We really appreciate your time and your curiosity. It means a lot to us.
Yes, thank you for listening. And don't forget to leave that review if you have a second. It really helps the show reach new listeners.
We will be back soon with another prompt, another deep dive, and hopefully a few more answers to the weird questions that make our world so interesting.
Until then, I am Herman Poppleberry.
And I am Corn. Have a great week, everyone.
Goodbye from Jerusalem.
Bye, everyone. Stay curious, and maybe move a little slower if you can. It is better for the soul.
Spoken like a true sloth. See you next time.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth